Hi everybody, Ken Heinz here, HFR President with the HFR 500 March 22 Performance Snapshot. It's also a recap of the first quarter performance for the HFR 500. Interestingly enough, it's been a volatile end to a volatile quarter, and we've seen the drivers of performance in March were pretty similar to what we've seen in the first quarter of the year. The biggest drivers being the military conflict from the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and secondly, higher interest rates and generationally high inflation, which has driven financial markets. The interesting change in March is in contrast to the prior 2 months where equity markets declined. Equity markets actually declined in the first part of the month, but then recovered later in the month. And at the same time, commodities also posted sharp gains for the month. What is very exciting is that as it pertains to hedge fund performance, we've seen a number of areas of record performance in both March and the first quarter, all following in the macro and macro sub-strategy area of performance. You can see here, looking at the month of March, we saw the HFR 500 macro index gain 6.25%, the highest performance since inception, and this well ahead of the gain of the NASDAQ composite of 3.4%. You can see the other strategy areas also had gains here, 2.4% for the overall composite. We had a gain of 0.75% for equity hedge and about 0.5% for relative value and 1/3% for event-driven index for the month of March. Record performance in macro sub-strategies also dominated the top sub-strategy area of performance for the month of March. You can see here the HFR 500 macro commodity index gained 18.1%, while the HFR 500 macro systematic diversified index, which includes quantitative trend following CTAs, gained about 6.7%. The interesting thing here is that the HFR 500 macro commodity is more discretionary fundamental macro commodity traders, whereas the 500 macro systematic diversified is trend following quantitative CTA strategies, which not only trade commodities but also trade fixed income, equity, and currency markets as well. You can see here also the third top area of performance, the HFR 500 equity hedge quantitative directional index. The first two of those, the macro commodity and macro CTA indices, were the strongest month of performance for those indices since inception. Continuing on the same themes of record performance, but now focusing on the first quarter as opposed to just March, you can see that the HFR 500 macro index has gained over 10%, and that's only for the first 3 quarters of the year. We've also seen gains for the overall composite of about 85 basis points, and a similar gain for the HFR 500 relative value index. Event-driven and equity hedge posted narrow declines, but even the worst area of performance, equity hedge, was well above the 9.1% decline of the NASDAQ composite. And as I mentioned earlier, the HFR 500 macro was not only a record for the month of March, but it's also a record performance for the first quarter of the year. Continuing on the theme of record performance, we see the HFR 500 macro commodity index once again leading area of sub-strategy performance, which a gain of 35.75% in the first quarter of the year. By far the strongest area of performance and the strongest quarter of performance for this index. That's a historic gain for any sub-strategy index for a quarter. And as I mentioned earlier, the macro commodity index is fundamental discretionary commodity trading hedge funds. Similarly, we also saw a record quarter for the HFR 500 macro systematic diversified index, a gain of 11.33%. As I mentioned earlier, the CTAs trade not only commodities, but they also trade other assets, including equities, fixed income, and currencies as well. We also saw strong gains from the HFR 500 energy-based material index, a little over 5% there, and about 4% for the HFR 500 multi-strategy. Again, those all well ahead of the decline of the NASDAQ of 9.1% for the year so far. It's been an exciting month, an exciting quarter of hedge fund performance. And if you're watching this video, you know we do regular performance updates on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel. In addition, please Go visit our website, www.hfr.com. When you get there, please download the Investor Guidebook. It has a tremendous amount of great information on the HFR 500 and how it's constructed. And if you'd like to arrange a call to talk more about it, please, you can send an email to me directly, Ken Heinz, or you can send it to HFR500 at hfr.com. Thanks for watching. We look forward to speaking with you next month.